University and Associate Director of the David Lamb Center. I'm very pleased to welcome our speaker, Professor Mike Peng. He is the Provost Distinguished Professor of Global Strategy at the University of Texas at Dallas and the Editor-in-Chief of the Asia Pacific Journal of Management. Mike is a native of Shanghai and no stranger to the Pacific Northwest since he studied for 4 years for his PhD program at the University of Washington. Prior to joining the University of Texas at Dallas, Mike served as an associate professor at the Ohio State University and before that time for a brief period of time at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Professor Peng has published widely in global strategy. His work has not only been widely cited by his fellow academics, but also in publications by the United Nations and the World Bank. He has 2 best-selling books in international business, one entitled Global Strategy and the other one entitled Global Business. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor to Mike.
And thanks very much, colleagues and students and friends of Simon Fraser University. It is my pleasure and honor to come here. I am working very closely with your dean, Professor Daniel Shapiro, at our Asia Pacific Journal of Management conference several blocks away at the Seagull School. We're running a new special issue on corporate governance. And Simon Fraser University has been very supportive of my work. And Rosie and I go way back. I remember several years ago when the International Association for Chinese Management Research gave me a scholarly contribution award. Guess who gave me that big award? It was your very own Professor Tang. We did that in Nanjing, China. So it was very, I felt this is not a strange place. I've been here many times. I've been to Vancouver many times. When I was at the University of Washington, I wanted to live in the Pacific Northwest, but after 4 years, I failed. So you guys are very lucky, okay, to be able to live in the most livable city in the world. I want to today talk to you about this topic. Hopefully my performance will be improved. A week ago, I gave this as a keynote speech at a conference with this title, China Goes Global at Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. We had a wide variety of students and scholars from different fields, not only business and management departments, but also history, education, political science, so on and so forth. So since we have filming, let me say this. The National Science Foundation has kindly supported my work. I don't mean to be obnoxious, but by law, I have to say the following. Everything I say belongs to my personal views, okay? In any public speaking engagement, I have to say it as a disclaimer so that you don't attribute anything I say to the National Science Foundation itself. So this is what I want to talk about. China goes global from a business management investment standpoint. I refer to the significant outward foreign direct investment, that's FDI or OFDI, made by Chinese multinational enterprises, MNE, roughly since the beginning of the 2000s. This is a very useful magazine I would recommend to you, China Business Review. It comes out once every 2 months, so it's not going to add very heavily to your reading load. It's published out of Washington, D.C. by the U.S.-China Business Council. It has fairly authoritative information, and this is the most recent cover page. Chinese foreign investment coming to a town near you. So I thought this is a very useful visual aid to help us talk about this topic. I could give you statistics, but I choose not to. Statistics are being reported left and right by media and lots of other sources. I'd rather focus on 3 very unique aspects, okay? Chinese investment abroad, you could use traditional theory to understand what they are doing, fine, but let's go beyond the tradition, okay? So I would argue there are 3 very unique attributes. One is the role of the domestic governments in China. So far in international business strategy, what we talk about when companies invest abroad, we talk about the host country government policies. Canadian companies go to China to invest. We focus more on the Chinese government policy. That's the host country government, right? But for the first time, we need to look at this underexplored role previously ignored by the literature. That is, when a new multinational enterprise goes abroad, what role does its home country government play behind its overseas charge? Second one is also interesting. It's the challenge of going abroad in the absence of significantly superior managerial and organizational and technological resources. So far, we've been talking about companies going around. Why do they go around as multinational enterprises? Because they have great technology, great capital, great management, great resources. But in the case of Chinese enterprises going abroad, we're not seeing very major qualitative advantage in terms of what they have and what they don't have. But nevertheless, they've gone abroad. The last one is about entry mode. Once you go abroad, how do you enter foreign markets? Traditional notion of international business involvement is more evolutionary. You export first, then you get your feet wet, you have a joint venture, you have an alliance. Then maybe after you've done all of the above, you have the guts, you go to acquire some overseas companies. Well, we have been seeing very rapid acceleration or rapid adaptation of Chinese enterprises going directly, jumping into this acquisition mode, and often high-profile acquisition, not low-profile, small-time acquisitions, big-time acquisitions. That's kind of interesting. So these are the three main points I wanted to highlight to all of you. As I did last week at Harvard, I'll be both professional and personal. I'll be both China and global. All right. So I'll start with a personal note. Okay. Please don't call me Mr. China. Don't call me Mr. Asia. Please call me Mr. Global. I mean it. Okay. My most recent book has this one-word title, just global. That's it. Not global business, not global strategy. Okay. I'm very proud to share with you. For now, I'm the only Chinese-born and Chinese-speaking author of several global business textbooks being studied by students not only here in Canada but also in 30 other countries around the world. And my publisher is very pleased with what I can contribute, and I intend to keep it up. Global Strategy is the book Rosalie kindly mentioned, now into the second edition, and international student editions. If you are not aware of this, I want to remind you, your competitors in China want to eat your lunch by studying my books. Okay? Be very careful. This is Chinese only. This is Chinese-English bilingual. Because they exactly want to study what you guys are studying, but some of the English is not as good as yours, so they read the Chinese-only version. And there is an Indian edition and a Portuguese edition. That's why I have to go to Brazil. I have customers in Brazil. Rosalie and I were talking about a new forthcoming major conference in Brazil, whether we wanted to go or not. So, so much for infomercial. Here's some beef. This is Global Fortune 500. And this is a pretty long span of the data since 1990 and 2008. So I will spend a little bit of time here because it's kind of interesting to see the blue slice is the United States. 2008, we had a very miserable year, down to only 142 companies out of Fortune 500. And then this is EU. EU's here went up a little bit to 170. And then this is Japan. Japan is, I believe, 70. This is the light green is Canada. Then we have South Korea, Switzerland. So this is a slice of China, Chinese enterprises belonging to the Global 500. It is still small, but it is the only slice that has been visibly expanding over the last several years. If you could just take a quick look at this rough figure and then all the others. So this is something I wanted to talk about. And we've been talking about emerging markets. We've been talking about BRIC, B-R-I-C, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So among China's BRIC friends, BRI, their MNEs are not expanding their presence on the global Fortune 500. So really, China is the driving force behind the block of BRIC countries, moving from 20 companies in 2005 to 37 in 2008. And US, EU, Japan numbers are here, as I alluded to. So that is the broad phenomenon as our context for our discussion. I just want you to keep that in mind. All right? So 3 points. Point 1 is the role of governments, home country governments, okay, not host country governments. And that is something we haven't studied. I think we at the field, Professor Peng is a leading expert on international business. I've done some work, and we have Professor Jing Li here also doing lots of work on international business. I think it's a fair criticism as a field. We just don't do enough about the role played by home country governments of these MNEs. We tend to look at host country governments. Well, China is China. It's kind of interesting. The emergence of Chinese MNEs is forcing all of us to pay more attention to the role played by their domestic governments, and I emphasize governments, plural forms, because we have different levels of governments in China and elsewhere. So now I'll be positive first, okay? I'm a very positive guy. Start on a positive note. From a positive standpoint, yes, the government has been using public media, nationalistic sentiments to generate this excitement, because it's very risky, it's very scary. If you've been operating and competing in China only as a manager, if now you are being encouraged by your government to go abroad, it's a very scary venture, especially for companies making their first step out of their home country. So the government's go global, go out policy has been playing a major role. But that policy alone is only providing the so-called moral support. The Chinese government, at least the central government, put real money on the table. Okay, real money, real cash on the table. Cash grants, subsidies, low interest loans, okay? So in some of these ways, directly supporting Chinese MNEs. And the last bullet point is interesting. Again, this is something we haven't studied, but China's emergence is making us become more aware. That is, if you as a government of certain jurisdictions, such as the province of British Columbia or the province of Guangdong in China, if you make your policy more friendly to incoming foreign direct investment, you are going to generate more outgoing foreign investment of your own companies. Why? Because if you don't impose lots of protectionist mechanisms, you allow lots of foreign companies to come in. Foreign companies may wipe out some of the domestic companies, especially if they are weak. But some of your stronger domestic companies may become stronger. They can not only defend themselves, and they also realize that best defense is offense. So Guangdong Province is a province in China, neighboring Hong Kong, attracting the largest number of inbound foreign direct investment into China. And not surprisingly, Guangdong is generating the largest amount of outward foreign direct investment. So you see the linkage between home government policy and the outward foreign direct investment made by firms in your jurisdiction. So that's very interesting. Now let's go negative. The negative role played by Chinese government. If you haven't had this information before, I suspect you would be as shocked as I was several years ago when I looked at statistics. Let's talk about Chinese OFDI, outward foreign investment. Where are they investing? Well, they invest more in British Virgin Islands than they invest in Great Britain. So in that regard, Great Britain is Little Britain. Okay, BVI is BVI, it's Great Britain, okay? And this is not a statistical error. It is real. And the differences are like 7 times. And then guess what? If you look at all these countries investing in China, again, BVI invests more in China than Great Britain does. And BVI also beats the US, beats Canada as recipients of Chinese outward FDI and as investors into China. And we know, anyone from British Virgin Islands? Anyone has been to British Virgin Islands? British Virgin Islands is a beautiful place known as an offshore location. It's not a, quote, real economy. Okay? So the question is why? Why, in one word or two words, capital round tripping? Capital round tripping. Hong Kong is a leading phenomenon, but since most of you probably knew Hong Kong, I don't need to mention Hong Kong. So lots of Chinese companies invest in BVI and then reinvest back home. It's a shame because by investing and registering a company in BVI, they become a foreign company. And then they go back to invest and do business in China. They get better treatment, preferential treatment per government policy. Everything is legal. So it is interesting, right? Very interesting. So I knew this information several years ago, so I was very puzzled. So I decided to do some field research. Here's what my personal field research with my 2 research assistants. My family took a Caribbean cruise in March of this year. So by reading the Caribbean islands tour guidebooks, I realized BVI is an economy in a jurisdiction with only 21,000 people, roughly the size of this district of the city of Vancouver, I suppose. It's tiny. If you haven't been there, highly recommended. You should all go there. It's a great place to be. Chinese investment to BVI supports BVI jobs, supports BVI taxation. That is China's contribution to global economy, to the Caribbean Sea economy. Okay, and you should all consider making your own contribution to the Caribbean Sea economy as well. I recommended last week at the China Goes Global conference. I said the next conference location, I recommend that we consider having the conference in British Virgin Islands. This is very relevant. I did my field research. As a side note, I want to share with you 2 of my findings. Okay, British Virgin Islands, the legal currency is the U.S. dollar. Surprise, surprise. Not the British pound sterling. Okay, and then we also went to U.S. Virgin Islands. My other finding is in the U.S. Virgin Islands, cars drive on the left side of the road. You didn't hear me saying anything wrong, okay? In British Virgin Islands, legal currency is the U.S. dollar, not the British pound sterling. But if you go to U.S. Virgin Islands, cars drive on the left side. The joke in BVI is with so much Chinese investment going there, maybe they'll consider adopting the Chinese yuan as their legal currency someday, okay? Very interesting global phenomenon, right? So more seriously, how does this China research contribute to our global understanding, the global literature? In a nutshell, it is an emphasis on institutions, home country governments as an institutional force. They create rules of the game. Then companies, managers play by the rules of the game. I mean, we're not talking about breaking rules of the game, but you got to understand the rules of the game. Then you got to play by these rules of the game. In this case, we have this emphasis on the role of domestic governments at various levels, central, provincial. I've done several papers, but I'm a very visual person. I believe a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm not going to bore you with lots of papers and points. But I think this is a one-slide summary of the key contributions my colleagues and I have been trying to make, essentially to suggest, to understand strategy, and then eventually to understand firm performance. We historically have been focusing on 2 views, industry-based view. You got to know the industry. Some of you may have studied Michael Porter 5 Forces, industry-based view. And the other is firm-specific resources and capabilities. What's unique about this firm? What's unique about that firm? What makes some firms succeed, others fail? All fine and great. But in addition, don't forget, I think this China research, and more broadly research on emerging economies, is helping us to add this 3rd leg. And I call this new thing a strategy tripod. A tripod means something sustaining a platform with 3 legs. You need to have 3 legs. To understand Chinese outward FDI behavior, that's their strategy, you got to understand these 3 views collectively. And that'll be very helpful. And I was very pleased to note that Professor John Dunning, a leading authority on international business theory and multinational enterprise theory, acknowledged the central role of institutions in the last paper that he published before his untimely death in January of this year. And questions, or do we stop for questions, or do we keep going? Okay, we'll keep going, but I'll leave some time for Q&As, okay? All right, so first point, done. Second point, going abroad without significant managerial and technological resources. Folks such as Professor John Dunning have been studying this beast, this most complex organizational beast in the world, known as the multinational enterprise, for ages. And we have lots of theories. But one criticism or one limitation I'd like to point out is almost all of the current theory is derived from experience of companies from developed economies. We just don't have enough theory telling us how do we better understand companies from emerging economies such as China, but also India, Russia, so on and so forth. So how do we understand the new breed? A colleague of mine in Australia, John Matthews, published one paper coining one term, which I would recommend to you, dragon multinationals. Not your traditional US-based or Canadian-based or UK-based multinationals, dragon multinationals. And what's unique about dragon multinationals? He said 3 letters, actually 1, LLL. What do they mean? Well, you got to go back to John Dunning's OLI. What is OLI? Ownership, location, internalization. But this new LLL framework is saying, look, these dragon multinationals go out of China, out of Hong Kong, out of South Korea, out of Mexico. They are good at doing 3 things. One is linkage. They are great at creating linkages, looking for connections, looking for gaps, and trying to fill these gaps. You know, it's not surprising. There is one big word in China now contributing to the English language literature, guanxi, right? Guanxi is about linkage, right? It's about linkage, all right? Networks. And I'll revisit this guanxi discussion later, okay? And the second one is leverage. Once you can see what's missing, once you can see what are the gaps, if you have the information, you have the insight, and you have the guts, you leverage whatever you know, try to overcome what you don't know and don't have, all right? And the third one is very interesting. Instead of having this teacher mentality, I teach you what to do, a lot of these Chinese enterprises openly said, well, we don't know what to do it, so we go to learn from how our colleagues and competitors do it overseas. So they have this learning mentality. That's the 3LLL framework. I believe in the future years to come, this will become a more influential framework, so it's interesting to introduce to all of you. It's very easy to remember: linkage, leverage, and learning. However, talk about the lack of technological resources of Chinese companies. That's both true and false. True, no need to talk further, but false. Here's some evidence about false. If you look at the patent data in 2008, which company had the largest number of patents in the world? Not your usual suspects, I'm sorry. It is this Chinese company called Huawei. Huawei. Okay, Huawei, if we could go back, I didn't spend any time on see, the major Chinese companies going abroad, you can see this is Haier, this is Lenovo, this is the logo of Huawei. This one is China Mobile. Okay, the 4 leading companies according to the illustrator of this magazine cover page. So anyway, Huawei is that company, telecom giant. You probably could recognize all these other companies between number 2 and number 10. Okay, but in 2008 alone, it is Huawei that charged ahead to be the world's #1 patent filing company, and that's quite something. You may remember several years ago, Huawei was that company being sued by Cisco Networks for intellectual property violation. And it was a major lawsuit. In fact, it took place in Texas because Huawei's headquarters, U.S. headquarters, is in Dallas, is half mile away from where my campus is. Eventually, Huawei was able to force Cisco to drop the charges. But during the court battle, Huawei essentially said, okay, intellectual property violation, China is not too famous for having great intellectual property protection as a country. But we are special. We are firm specific. We are Huawei. We invest 10% of our sales in R&D. And we care about intellectual property protection. Okay? So this newest data is not able to help Huawei to win that case as part of the supportive arguments. But I think after several years, you do see Huawei charging ahead in support, for our conceptual purposes, in support of the early arguments that Huawei made in front of the public in a courtroom about how important it felt in terms of investing in R&D big time. It is a company investing a big deal in R&D. So that's firm specific, okay? The next slide, this one, take a look at China as a whole. China as a whole, all right? Last year, China was the sixth largest number of, China had the sixth largest number of patents in the world. The US was still number one. US-China difference was 9 times. So if you just look at those numbers, you'll think, oh, difference is huge. Well, not as huge as before, because several years ago in 2004, China was the 14th behind Israel. Israel was able to beat China in terms of the number of patents filed. Okay? Israel is very famous for generating a lot of innovative ventures and companies, but Israel is Israel with a population of about 4 million people. And Israel was able to beat China. Okay? So the US-China difference at that time was 27 times. You see the rapid closing of the gap. Okay, emerging closing of the gap. And if you look at the growth rate last year, China was growing its patent filing rate at the rate of 12%. That's positive. And the US suffered from a negative growth, and South Korea was also doing very well in terms. So you see some direction, okay? In terms of technological resources, China is catching up, all right? Now, next one is going to discuss a little bit about managerial resources. I personally believe it's easier for China and Chinese companies to climb on the technology ladder. It's harder for them to climb the managerial capabilities ladder. We're not talking about your usual average run-of-the-mill kind of managers. China has plenty of these people, okay? What we're dealing with is internationally experienced, confident, and capable managers who are very comfortable dealing with locals who do not know how to use chopsticks. Okay? It is these kind of locals that I'm talking about. Okay? How many of these Chinese managers have you met lately? Not a whole lot. Okay? I would argue. And some of them, and maybe all of them, are busy studying my books. It's real. I'll give you one anecdote. As I taught one EMBA class in China, so I was talking about this antitrust framework. I said, look, if you go to Canada, go to the United States, be very careful, don't talk to your competitors. If you did, you'd be caught. It's illegal. And this is a question they had. They said, what? What are you talking about, Professor Peng? What? We can't talk to your competitors? I said, that's right, you can't talk to your competitors. What do you guys do? Do you talk to your competitors? They said, all the time. And then, so I said, okay, let's close the classroom door, okay? You talk to your competitors, I appreciate your candor. Is that legal or illegal in China? They said, of course it's legal. We even went on TV. So there was an EMBA student who was involved in the color TV industry. The color TV industry in China went on TV. Color TV industry went on TV. Tongue twister. They announced this industry-wide price union. What they really are doing is price fixing. Okay? There was this recent Hollywood movie unleashed last month. Have you seen that? It's called The Informant. You guys have been studying books too hard. Write it down. Watch that movie, The Informant. It's very easy. It's a Hollywood movie. It's about price fixing. Okay, it's about price fixing called The Informant. No, it's a very good movie. It has educational value. So this is a distance between the Chinese manager's mentality and the legal and regulatory framework in developed economies. I think all of us here may play some role in bridging the gap. They just don't know the existence, and they do that all the time, talking to your competitors. It was legal at that time. They went on TV, and then I said, I was curious. Okay, you guys went on TV. You fixed the price. Then what did you do? They went back home to each of their companies, they went down to drop prices. Again, it was like, so I said, why did you guys do that on TV? They said, to do it on TV is a public commitment. We'll fix the price. It's like, you know, when you get married, why do you invite so many people to your big banquet and to your church gathering? It is because you want to make it harder for you to eventually have a divorce. Public commitment, got it? So all these Chinese executives went on TV, they said the industry is suffering from devastating price drops, we're going to stop it, okay? And it's legal, we'll just do it for the benefits of the industry. We don't chop prices. Just like many people, after doing this wonderful public commitment to get married, to stay in love forever, ended up divorcing, right? So these Chinese executives ended up chopping prices anyway. But the point is, they were so astonished, and I was so astonished to you know, both sides trying to have a conversation. It was quite educational to me. Speaking of, you know, their lack of knowledge, not only the English language knowledge, but legal and regulatory knowledge, okay? And also the informal, you know, aspects, eating habits, drinking habits, so on and so forth. I mean, it's quite shocking. And bear in mind, these are not the average Chinese people that you can hail from the street. These are the best educated Chinese managers interested in taking my class, which is overseas strategy, internationalization strategy. They took my class before they took their companies abroad. So they will have a long way to go, basically. All right? So another issue is I want to give you some more systematic data about regional distribution. They say, oh, China is going abroad. China's, quote, taking over the world. No, relax, okay? Regional distribution actually will show you signs of weakness. Regional distribution, this is a pie chart. The big blue half is Chinese OFDI going to Hong Kong, so hardly foreign at all right? And then the rest of Asia, is this. That's 13%, the rest of Asia. And then you see Latin America and the Caribbean, 19%. And then it's Europe, it's Africa. Then it's North America, Oceania. So you see lots of headline news about Chinese taking over Africa. Okay, media hype. Okay, despite such headlines, 50% of the FDI goes to Hong Kong, and 13% goes to the rest of Asia, excluding Hong Kong. So Africa commands only 6%. All right, and Latin America and Caribbean seems to be getting 19%, a sizable chunk. But of the 19%, 18% goes to British Virgin Islands and Cayman Islands, CI. Okay, so how much Chinese investment there is going to the real economies of Latin America? Not a whole lot. Some, okay, increasing, true. But that distribution indicates some signs of weakness, not strength. Lots of capital round tripping. 50% of the capital going to Hong Kong. God knows what is the percentage of such capital floating back to China, okay? And then BVI and Cayman Islands. I told you the story. No need to repeat. So this is some story that we can tell based on the data, basically. Third one. So far we've been talking about two things: the role played by home country governments and the observation of the Chinese companies going abroad in the absence of superior technological and managerial resources. Third one is also very interesting. The rapid adaptation of acquisitions as the entry modes. All right? And that goes against the traditional teaching in many international business textbooks. What's going on? And beyond the textbook teaching, the second bullet point talks about the foreign companies competing inside China. They have been competing in China for 20, 30 years. They are the sources of learning for indigenous Chinese companies. Okay? Indigenous Chinese companies compete with them, collaborate with them, have joint ventures with them, and learn from them, and hire managers away from them. Okay? So these foreign MNEs are the sources of learning and observation for the Chinese MNEs. So if you try to predict what they have been learning, what they have been observing, you will not reach a conclusion that based on what they've been observing, they've been learning, and what the foreign companies have been doing, exports first, alliances second, lots of joint ventures, and then some wholly owned foreign subsidiaries. Then they will jump into this acquisition mode, buy all the time. So this is a big puzzle, right? This is very interesting. What's going on? We have not encountered such behavior, a big deal. This is from The Economist, how China sees the world in the March 21st to 27th issue. I give credit to The Economist. I'm quoting The Economist. If I would recommend all of you pick up that magazine. It's a very useful, hilarious, and humorous and sarcastic magazine. Some of you may have difficulty reading what's on this, the words. I'll show you this. Okay, this is how China sees the world. See the Statue of Liberty? Can you see the words, Statue of Liberty? Jane, can you see the words in the back? Please give generously. This is a big gap of Wall Street. So this is Canada. There is no comments on Canada. America is full of disasters. Latin America, mining operations. Europe is represented by 2 leading brands. This is how Chinese view Africa: pyramids, tourist location, and oil wealth. Japan is a bunch of islands. I'm sure you're paying attention. Taiwan is a PRC island. And Hong Kong is Spratly Island. So rightly or wrongly, this is how China sees the world, or how The Economist, the British magazine, interprets how China sees the world. What are they looking for? Financial services firms, technology firms in the States, brands and brand companies owning brands in Europe, and resources in Australia, Africa, Latin America, so on and so forth. What are these motives behind overseas mergers and acquisitions? This is a teaching slide directly cut and paste from one of my books. There are lots of motives behind mergers and acquisitions around the world. And this is not based on China research. It's entirely based on non-China research, but I think we can learn a thing or two from this global wisdom. 2 things coming to mind. One is this hubris motives. What is hubris? Managerial overconfidence. I can do it. We can do it. Because we're big, we're strong, we have money. And the other is called managerial motives. We really struggle. I don't think that's the best label. What do we mean by managerial motives? Managerial motives essentially means empire building. I don't think this will work, but I'll do it anyway because it's not on my money. It's on shareholders' money or taxpayers' money. Okay? If I manage a larger enterprise, my pay, my power, my prestige, my exposure on TV go up. Okay? If I fail, too bad. I just burn some other people's money. Okay? So the first hubris motives, the difference here is the hubris motives really suggests we believe we can do it. I believe I can do it. I really didn't think so. Okay? The second, managerial motives, refer to managers' secret notion they actually are not sure. Okay? But they keep doing this for their own personal benefits. So around the world, again, based on non-China research, 70% of the mergers and acquisitions fail, 70% around the world. So will Chinese OFDI-based M&As do better than global average? I don't have any data, but if you push me to a corner and force me to guess, I'll say unlikely. Okay? I'll say unlikely. For 2 reasons. One is the idea that mergers and acquisitions fail 70% around the world. 2 major problems. Pre-acquisition, the problem is overpaying, overbidding. You pay too much, then you can't derive profits, can't derive benefits. Okay? Now there is some very interesting research talking about the emergent data. Firms, not only from China, but from other emerging economies, when they go after targets in developed economies, they have a tendency to systematically overbid, systematically overpay. So the previous table I shared with you deals with managerial hubris. Now, on top of managerial hubris, you have national hubris or nationalistic hubris. This is also very evident in recent Indian acquisitions of non-Indian firms. rightly or wrongly, lots of Indian firms just wanted to acquire British targets just for the heck of it. Okay? So in the bidding war, they keep paying more money and more money and more money. And now such acquisitions are burning their hands. All right? So what we are dealing with managerial hubris here, but we're also dealing with poor corporate governance. That's the theme of our APJM conference here ongoing at the Seagull School. I'm just skipping out of that conference. It's about lack of effective corporate governance, lack of board control. Nobody on the board is going to stop these managers, crazy managers going abroad, taking over one company after another, not using their own money, by the way, right? So there are constraints elsewhere in other companies, but right now we are seeing seemingly lack of constraints of these companies' overseas acquisition behavior, which is very interesting, puzzling. But if you look at the corporate governance standpoint, it makes sense. They just have very little or no constraints about how much money they can spend, basically. And post-acquisition, the crucial issue is integration. How you integrate an acquired company, an acquired unit into your ongoing operations. And again, acquisition is a major area of failure, major source of failure for lots of companies merging and acquiring. It has nothing to do with the capabilities of the Chinese companies, okay? I'll just show you this one slide, one cartoon, you'll see my point, right? This is some restructuring acquisition efforts about how to integrate the board of directors after acquisition. Boards of directors showed up, they just have a problem here, okay? As you know, some details of the new merger have yet to be resolved, okay? And again, these are not Chinese folks. This has nothing to do with China, but looking at the global perspective, I think there is reason to believe they will have a great deal of time swallowing, digesting, and absorbing the acquired units into their ongoing operations, and they start from a very low level of managerial capabilities. Exhibit A, in terms of case study, there was this Chinese company called TCL acquiring a French company called Thomson several years ago. It was written up by the Chinese press. Great Chinese company. It was the first major large-scale Chinese acquisition before Lenovo. Okay, so great. Chinese companies are now acquiring foreign companies. Guess what? Chinese media is now writing up big time about the failure of TCL after several years. And Lenovo has given up its efforts, its focus on globalization. Lenovo said, integrating around the world is just too hard. Let's focus on what? China. Okay, after several years. So you see what I'm getting at. And in fact, we have one paper by two colleagues, Chen and Yang, forthcoming APJM next year. They actually have done a systematic study of the Chinese shareholders themselves. The Chinese shareholders are not being fooled. They knew these company managers, big shot managers, are spending their money fooling around, going to Canada, Australia, having a great time. And the stock price of these companies, when they announced major overseas acquisitions, usually took a beating. Okay, so we have great stories about Chinese shareholders stir-frying lots of stocks, playing individually, and some of them are losing money big time and jumping off the cliff and so on and so forth. So individually, some of these shareholders might be idiots, but collectively they are smart, they are wise. They are not easily fooled, okay? This is, in finance we call this market efficiency hypothesis. Collectively, the market cannot be fooled. Individually, individual shareholders might be fooled. So, Chinese investors themselves, they are in China. They knew these Chinese companies. They knew their managers. They knew their capabilities, and they knew what they are doing. Despite the media writing about very grand acquisition moves, going abroad, going overseas, wonderful, China is standing up. All of that is both true and false. Okay, and Chinese shareholders themselves, this is a great paper, first a systematic piece of evidence, using not investors from overseas, investors in China, how they dealt with these overseas moves. We talked about this. Here's another barrier from our friends, illustrated by our friends in The Economist magazine. This cover page was from 2007, okay? Fear of, America's fear of China. I put the two words yellow peril in quotation marks, okay? Historical racism, certainly existed, and modern prejudice, it's hard to deny their existence, but racism, prejudice, this is the kind of stuff empirically very hard to verify. You can interview 100 people, are you a racist? 100 of them will say, no, of course I'm not. Okay? But this is an interesting figure here. In Chinese, arrogance and ignorance don't help either. Very ignorant, very arrogant, making high-profile acquisitions. They don't help. Okay? And I run my slides with my own MBA students. We had discussions at Harvard last week, and I could also discuss with you. I had some discussion about this cartoon being very hostile. Some of you may feel so. Why would they portray a panda grabbing the Empire State Building? But no. I said, relax. This is a cute panda. Who doesn't like a cute panda? Okay? At least a cartoonist did not draw an ugly-looking vicious dragon. That could have been worse, right? About what happened, in terms of some major Chinese acquisition attempts that failed. Rio Tinto in Australia, U.S. banking and oil assets, some Canadian acquisitions. Now here is a vicious dragon. Now we're talking about the Empire Strikes Back, courtesy of the line from the Star Wars movies, okay? The Empire Strikes Back. Out of frustration, Chinese government arrested a bunch of Rio Tinto company employees in Shanghai in July after the acquisition attempt failed. So some people went to jail, unfortunately. And then U.S. banks acquisition attempts in China, the Chinese are essentially saying, let's play tit for tat, okay? You don't let us do it, forget about your bank's acquisition in China. About a month ago, President Obama announced tariffs against Chinese tire imports, and China immediately, it's like they prepared this. Next day, they launched investigations of U.S. auto parts and chicken products. I think auto parts, that makes great sense, but chicken products, I just don't understand why chicken products. Why pick on chicken? So let's say which party will chicken out first. Okay, that's my line. Which party will chicken out first? Okay. Another dimension. We'll stop at 3, right? 3 o'clock, right? Okay, so we have some time. Yeah. I could skip some slides, but I think this is interesting. I just alluded to the fact that antitrust law is like totally unfamiliar territory to Chinese executives. Okay, this is true. As of 2008, China started to enact and implement its very first anti-monopoly law. And that was 118 years after the Sherman Act of 1890 in the United States. A lot of us have written about the necessity for China to improve its legal and regulatory framework. I have done some of that, although I'm not a lawyer, but from a company, policy-making standpoint, it's important. However, what we are seeing is this new law being turned into a kind of trade war weapon. Okay, we're talking now about the transformation from trade wars to antitrust wars, using antitrust laws or anti-monopoly laws of China and of different countries. The first bullet point regards now any merger of two companies that are not even headquartered in China. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce will stick its neck out by saying, we got to study it, we got to approve it. If we don't like it, forget it. And again, China is learning from the EU playbook. You may remember in 2001, there were two US headquartered companies, GE and Honeywell. They wanted to merge. The US antitrust authorities said, go ahead, no problem. Eventually, they didn't make it. The reason why, it's because of the EU antitrust scrutiny. The EU said, we don't like what you're doing. So forget it, we're going to torpedo the deal. So then now the Chinese, at least the Chinese government, is asserting this role, this new power that it gives itself, basically. And now, second bullet point deals with the very first application of the law to block, say no to an acquisition attempt. In this case, we're talking about Coca-Cola's acquisition of Huiyuan. Huiyuan is the #1 juice maker in China. In this case, Huiyuan's owners were very happy to sell because of some of these astounding numbers, 50 times Huiyuan's earnings and 200% premium. Okay? Okay, so if you were Huiyuan's owners, you'd be very happy. So both you, Huiyuan's owners, and Coca-Cola now hated the Ministry of Commerce. Okay? You might not get that saying. This again is something that I cut and paste from The Economist. I scanned from The Economist. The title is Hard to Swallow. Hard to swallow. The deal was hard to swallow for both sides because of new, major, extensive, and hostile government intervention. Okay, jumping out. They're not protecting Huiyuan. They're not protecting the Chinese company, so on and so forth. So I think this is a new frontier. We got to pay more attention to some of these institution-based issues, legal and regulatory frameworks. They keep changing. They learn from each other, okay, and they influence each other. And China having more extensive legal and regulatory framework might not be what you had wished for, basically. Of course, trade wars have not become a thing of the past. This is from no longer the most recent issue, one of the recent issues of The Economist magazine. The tire incident is now written up by some Chinese media as the 911 attack on China. You know what that means, right? And I went online, at least I got The Economist every Monday. So I went online, they posted this article online the weekend before. In the online version, they didn't have the word mad. So I'm sure the editor-in-chief of The Economist exercising his or her editorial power. Between the time the piece was posted online and the time the piece was printed, this word mad was posted. Was printed, you can see, right? America's mad trade war. Okay, which is very, very, very interesting, right? America's mad trade war. So trade wars certainly have not become a thing of the past. I personally am very troubled, and professionally very troubled by these trade wars, antitrust wars, trade wars, you name it, because we need to do better as a global economy. In preparation for this speech, I actually went to look at some most boring political statements collectively authored by the US and Chinese governments. They moved their high-level dialogues from strategic economic dialogue to strategic and economic dialogue, just adding one and. I'm a professor of strategy. I really like this way that they use the word strategic, making strategic more strategic, right? Okay, so in the most recent meeting, they agreed, I'm quoting them directly, they agreed two things. China confirms that in its stimulus package, it keeps mentioning domestic companies will get benefits. So China confirms domestic companies as a term is defined by Chinese-owned companies and also foreign invested companies as long as they operate in China, hire Chinese workers, support Chinese jobs. Okay? The US government swears that this thing called CFIUS, which is an acronym for Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States. I'm sorry, I just don't know enough about the Canadian situation. I'm sure Canada has some similar government review mechanism. So the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States will not discriminate against Chinese outward foreign direct investment because China, at least from the Chinese government standpoint and from the media standpoint, there is widespread reporting about the US side just didn't like the Chinese side because you're Chinese. So the Chinese government made the US government swear that they would not do this. Okay? And then they also said the US government agreed to have open and non-discriminatory principles for sovereign wealth funds. They, of course, had China in mind, but they didn't mention China in this particular point. I do want to share some of my thoughts targeting different audiences. And I think it's important for us to have some dialogue with policymakers, or at least know what they're thinking about. I know many of us are students. We don't care about politics. We're not very political. No. You need to care about politics. Okay? You need to be political. Because if you're not at the table, you may be on the menu. Get it? If you're not on the table, you may be on the menu. Okay? So it's very important for us to know what the people at the table are talking about. Okay? Then you have something to say. I think it was not an accident. A week ago, we had this conference at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, Kennedy School. So it's understandable to see nationalistic backlash. Okay, forget about the incoming Chinese investment from the U.S. side, from the Canadian side, losing traditional U.S. or Canadian companies. That hurts. I can understand that. Okay. But the Chinese are not going to take over the world, okay? There is this big media hype about the so-called Chinese takeover, incoming Chinese influence. They contribute roughly, so far, 1% of the global total of FDI volume, of which 4% goes to North America. And I believe, let's say, 1% goes to Canada, comes to Canada. So that's the relative sense you should get in terms of having some perspective about the scale and scope of such investment. And US and Canadian MNEs have been doing their own acquisitions around the world, including in China. So this summer I spoke with Chinese executives, and they were very pissed off by the Rio Tinto failure in Australia. I said, guys, relax. Now, if we have an Australian company coming to China acquiring the #1 oil field, or the #1 gold mine, or the #1 coal field, will you as Chinese executives, or will you as policymakers in the Chinese government be so happy and just let it happen? No, of course not, right? So you got to understand both ways. Okay, you got to stand in the other side's shoes to understand why some of your behavior, some of your activity may provoke backlash. And there are ways to minimize such liability of foreignness. One jargon we have in international business is liability of foreignness. People don't like you because you're a foreigner. Okay, and because we are all brought up in our own respective cultures and environments and countries, so there is a liability of foreignness. So as a foreign entrant, have you done enough to minimize the liability of foreignness? Okay, my friends and colleagues, Professor Steve Globerman and your dean Daniel Shapiro this year wrote this paper. They did a fairly extensive review of the pros and cons of foreign direct investment. Nothing is perfect in the world. Everything has pros and cons. Okay, so for foreign direct investment coming from China, the important issue policymakers have to make is, do the pros outweigh the cons, right? Or do the cons outweigh the pros? And they reached this conclusion, okay, Chinese outbound FDI is a new phenomenon. But being new does not necessitate additional pieces of specific legislation. And I suppose it's the same case for Canada as well. Policymakers, this is how to play the game, right? And how do you play this card? How do you play this card? It's hard, right? China and US trade and Canada trade. However, I want to show you this. This is a great way to transform boring statistics into a highly informative figure. I'm not that creative, not by me. This Charles Kindleberger guy in '73 published this work. Okay, what this is talking about is contraction of world trade during the Great Depression between 1929 and 1930. Every year he has monthly data. January of 29, February, March, April, going round and round and round. Eventually, I mean, this is a great way to turn this very boring statistical table into this. And the title of it is Down the Tube. And I will be more visual. I'll say down the toilet. World trade, okay? When countries around the world started to do trade wars. Trade wars fundamentally is about lack of confidence. If I open my borders, do I have confidence you will do the same? If you start launching some trade war attacks on me, what do? Remember, the empire strikes back. So I go tit for tat. Then you attack me further. You hurt me in a bigger, major way. So trade wars between the G2 now is not only destroying confidence between China and the United States, destroying global confidence. Okay? The world community as a whole has experienced this before. Okay? And after global trade volume went down the toilet, you know what happened? Germany democratically voted Hitler into power. And it was a democratic election, make no mistake. And the rest, as we said, is history, right? So this could potentially be very dangerous if the new world that we live in today follows the old tradition that way. I do want to say, you know, we are in, at least, I guess some of us are not from the business school, right? But most of us, I suspect, are from the business school. We're in business and economics and trade and investment, all that good stuff. Great, making money, great, profits, wonderful. But beyond that, we are not just here making some dirty profit. For all those of you business school students, I want you to be very proud. Everything we do is helping maintain world peace. Okay? Because buyers and sellers may have conflicts, may have disputes. They usually don't like to kill each other. Right? Do you agree? In 1941, the US was exporting oil to Japan that was invading China big time. Eventually, the US said, we got to cut off your oil supply in protest of your invasion of China. You got to get out. The Japanese did not make the decision to attack Pearl Harbor lightly. Only after the US finally cut off oil supplies. Then there were only 2 years of oil supply for Japan as a nation if they didn't fight the war, because they had a big war going on, so they only had about 6 months of oil supplies. So then they attacked Pearl Harbor. Okay, so no, this is real. This is real. I don't want to sound too negative, so I'll give you a positive theory, okay? This is the Dell theory of world peace, courtesy of our friend Thomas Friedman, who is the author of The World is Flat. I personally disagree with lots of things he said, but I like this point he made. He essentially said, if for all the well, some of us may be using a Dell computer, right? A Dell computer is made by about 12 to 15 countries involved in this global supply chain. Friedman said, for any 2 countries or all the 15 countries involved in the global supply chain, as long as they're involved in this Dell global supply chain, they will not go to war against each other. So the joke was these soldiers from Russia and Georgia went to war, eating McDonald's hamburgers, but fighting. Okay, but that was a minor violation. By and large, the McDonald's theory is good. So far, there's no evidence that Dell's theory has been violated. So that's pretty powerful theory, right? Very interesting. And another notion about, you know, do we need to do something to deal with these incoming Chinese MNEs because they are state-owned enterprises? They are very scary. They represent the interest of the Chinese government. Well, that anti-SOE argument is now collapsing in front of our eyes. Okay? Again, I want to share some of my just-in-time learning based on my reading of the very boring government documents, okay, from the SNED joint press releases. Now they have this new term, GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises, led by government motors. You know what I mean, okay? But this is the official term. You may want to make a note of it. SOE sounds like a dirty word. The US refused to accept we have SOEs. Yeah, we don't have SOEs. We have GSEs. What differences are there? We have a laugh, right? So, but that's in the government documents, okay, in the public domain. So, you know, SOEs are not so scary after all. Some quick advice to managers. I bet some of you will become managers some days, and you will be involved, especially given your location in this great city and your orientation toward the Asia Pacific. Some of you may be involved in managing some of these enterprises, either going to China or coming from China. Master the rules of the game. Okay, that's a very simple but challenging point of teaching. You got to master the rules of the game, and you got to learn. I want to point out some concrete sources of learning. That is, take a look at Japanese investment in the United States and Canada and the EU in the last 20-some years. Okay, a previous generation of students and practitioners encountered Japanese investment, and again, Western media was full of this hype about the fact, about the possibility, not the fact, that the Japanese were going to take over the world. We're going to take over America, Canada, Australia, you name it. right? Well, fast forward now, what happened? Nobody cares about Japanese investment in the US or in Canada. If there is anything they do, they create this positive impact, supporting 600,000 jobs and supporting the #1 automaker in the United States. So the advice to Chinese managers or people helping these Chinese managers is to say, look, the media may have its field day. The federal government might be kind of hostile, but if you truly demonstrate your goodwill by going to the state governments, local governments, injecting real dollars, supporting real jobs, who doesn't appreciate that? Okay, when jobs are hard to come by. Okay, and one main point that I keep emphasizing is you got to have very thick skin. Thick skin. Chinese are especially known for not having thick skins. Okay, what you are seeing is the man with the thickest skin. Okay, okay. Thick skin means endurance. Means keep trying. Means don't jump off the cliff when your first attempt failed. Okay. In academia, I don't know about you, but Rosalie and Jean will know very well. In academia, we submit a paper to our top journals. The rejection rates are 90%. So if I open up my jacket, it's full of bullet holes. Okay, lots of rejections. Okay, no, but the point is you got to keep trying. Okay, eventually you will do better. You will triumph. It's initially when you do something like high-profile acquisition and expect that big deal to be successful, that's not very realistic. Okay. Why don't you go low profile? Be more evolutionary. Have a small-scale investment. That'll test your abilities. That'll help you avoid the media's radar screen. That'll help you avoid the government scrutiny. Okay? And you gain more experience. You learn how to use forks and knives when eating instead of using chopsticks all the time. Okay? And then gradually, you will enhance your capabilities. This is what the Japanese have been doing. A generation ago, Japanese investment was criticized by this yellow peril, this incoming, Japanese influence takeover. Eventually you got to realize attention span in Washington and media is short. Okay, today it's about China, tomorrow it's about healthcare, next day it's going to be about Afghanistan. Just stick around, okay? Stick around, have thick skin. Advice to some other advice to managers. You really need to, as I said repeatedly, build up your resources and capabilities, okay? Skipping the usual evolutionary steps to jump directly into acquisitions is kind of like gambling, Chinese are very famous, at least some Chinese, right, are very famous for engaging in gambling, right? Well, good luck. Some gamblers will win, most gamblers will lose money by supporting Las Vegas and Macau SAR, right? So, you could choose to do gambling, that's okay. But by and large, I wouldn't bet my money on the success of your gambling outcomes, basically. Another issue is, how about having some private equity firms? They're not looking for good deals. They used to look for deals going to China. Now they're looking for deals away from China, out of China, coming to Canada, Australia, so on and so forth. Maybe they can help you reduce your liability of foreigners. And simple notion in mergers and acquisitions: don't overpay. Be very careful. Okay, in any bidding war situation, if the bidding level goes too high, be prepared to walk out. Because otherwise, if you win the bidding war, in any kind of auction situation, remember the winner's curse. The winner's curse. The winner in any auction may have overpaid. Once you overpay, you add the integration difficulties. Your outcome is kind of predictable, unless you're super lucky, right? Advice to researchers: I think China is going to create a major impact in provoking and renewing research interest on two institution-based dimensions. One is anti-dumping. The other is antitrust. It's really a shame of our field, okay, myself included. In the last 39 years, 35 years, between 1970 and 2005, the #1 journal in the international business field, Journal of International Business Studies, has published only one paper with that title, Anti-Dumping, in the title and in the abstract. And the #1 journal in strategic management, SMJ, since its founding in 1980. So I did a comprehensive, exhaustive literature search. I fished out one paper with the word antitrust in the title and one more in the abstract, and I said, the shame is mine as well, because I did not author any of these three papers. Okay? No, but we need to do more. And we just don't know enough. And we as a field has been collectively ignoring such important issues. Before China's challenge is forcing us to know more, but we just don't have enough underlying knowledge. Like mergers and acquisitions, we have a ton of research. We can predict with some reasonable confidence what will happen with Chinese FDI M&As. But with antitrust, with anti-dumping, we just don't know enough. That's why, remember, go watch that movie, The Informant, okay? If your professors give you a hard time, why do you spend such good time watching the movie, The Informant? Tell them Professor Peng asked you to do so, okay? The Informant. It's about antitrust, price fixing, very important. So I would argue that, previously lots of inbound investment into China resulted in international joint ventures. And boom, we had an explosion of research about international joint ventures, and Professor Jing Li contributed some of this work. Great. So I expect next round we're going to see the generation of a new, maybe explosion, but the new increase of research focusing on these two issues, anti-dumping and antitrust. Very important. We just don't know enough about what's going on. And now China is forcing us to pay more attention. The growth of the Chinese firm, now talking about mergers and acquisitions overseas, this might be the final frontier. In 1996, I published one of the earliest papers about the growth of these firms, and I actually mentioned 3 possibilities. How would the Chinese firms grow? Generic growth, inter-organizational alliances such as joint ventures and mergers and acquisitions. It's in the paper, you can read it. I actually said MNEs were not feasible. Oh boy, was I wrong or what? Okay, as a scholar, I have to be honest. Scholarly honesty is important. I mean, I'm the first one to admit I totally failed to predict the explosive growth of very rapid adaptation of MNEs as a mode, not only inside China but going out of China. It is just crazy, right? So because of this rapid growth, and I played a role here in influencing this literature, so we just don't have a lot of research even on domestic MNEs in China, let alone to have much knowledge about international MNEs. It's like, for now, it's a blank sheet of paper. Last week, in fact, in this month, published in October of 2009, this is the first paper my colleagues and I have done to look at mergers and acquisitions systematically in the United States and in China to see how they are different. And I was confessing to all of you, this is not a paper about international MNEs. It's about domestic MNEs in China. We actually found there are major differences. The title is How Do Networks and Alliance and Learning Drive MNEs, an institutional comparison between China and the United States. So this paper is already published. And if there is only one point, I could go over several points, but in the interest of time, I'll just say we found systematic differences. So creating new interest in knowing more about the international MNEs. I have these points, but let me skip in the interest of time, okay? I do want to conclude, and then we hopefully will have some time for Q&As. So conclusion. I don't really have any firm conclusion I want to discuss with you by raising a question, okay? Is China unique, or is it a member of the global family? There is this raging debate about Chinese exceptionalism, meaning China is so unique, it deserves its own theory, its own way of doing business, its own lawmaking, rulemaking, its own definition of religion. In fact, Peng and Rosie and I had this discussion about how to define religion in the Chinese context. We found none of the traditional definitions would work, right? So, there is this philosophical debate. But for us in the management school, the issue is, do we need to have a Chinese theory of management? And Rosalie and I, and Jing, in some ways, were involved with this Chinese Management Research Association. I think we debate and, soul search all the time on this question, right? Yeah, China's big, so is it big enough to deserve its own theory? Maybe so. Well, if so, China being so big, do we then really need a Shanghainese theory of management? And maybe that's the case in Scottish theory, Welsh theory, or British Columbia theory of management. How low the level do we go? I mean, we could debate. It's interesting. It's entertaining, in fact, for us to talk about this. No concrete answers. But I do want to share with you this thing. you don't have to be Chinese speaking, but now if you open up a Wall Street Journal, Fortune magazine, Business Week, Economist, this Chinese word guanxi is a leading success, recent success of the Chinese language contribution into the English language, right? You're supposed to know this. Guanxi. Okay, just as a side joke, what are the 3 non-business Chinese words that have penetrated into the English language? Kung Fu, very good. That's one. Kung Fu, what else? Tofu, very good. Kung Fu, tofu. And there's another one about a sport. Well, you ask anyone here, do they understand Tai Chi? So I don't think Tai Chi is that one. Let's say we talk to a seemingly uneducated person in the streets of Vancouver. Ping pong. You don't have to be an SFU graduate to know these 3 Chinese words, okay? Kung Fu, ping pong, and tofu. Now, as an educated SFU graduate, you got to pick up one more Chinese word, guanxi. Okay? That's the value we're adding here, right? But a larger question is, why don't we use the English words like connections or networks or ties, right? Why do we use the word? Because I have friends and students from around the world. They say, oh, this stuff, in Russia we call this blood. Anyone from Vietnam? In Vietnam they call this guan hei. If you speak Cantonese, it's exactly the same. The Cantonese will call this guanxi. Guanxi is Mandarin, guan hei. So you go to Vietnam, they say, we call this word guan hei too. So the word is not that unique to China or Chinese, but it's an interesting phenomenon. It's a linguistic phenomenon, right? That word is now penetrating into the English language as if this word is so unique. There's no way for the English language words to capture this, so we have this Mandarin or Pinyin spelling, right? So this is a simple diagram. China, I would argue, is a member of the global economy. In the middle of it, scholars and students need to act local, act China, but think global. Don't ever forget China is always a member of the global economy. China is China. So my personal answer, whether China is unique, the answer is both yes and no, true and forth. Okay. I think in relationship with India and China, Russia, Western economies, and transition economies, emerging economies, China has multiple complex relationships with all these labels. But China is not alone in itself in the world. It is important for all of us not to lose sight about this point. This is my very last slide. I do have a burning question I want to discuss with all of you. Now we're facing this new translation challenge, okay? How do we translate these 4 Chinese characters? Okay, so do we call these counterfeit phone, bandit phone? Or you can help me out. Do we have anything more accurate, more descriptive to capture this? Or just use the new pinyin, call this san zai feng? Burning question. So I will stop here, and thank you very much for your time. I'm now opening up to any questions you may have. Help me answer this question, I'd appreciate it. No, it's a real challenge. I mean it. I'm here to learn from you, to discuss with you. All right?
I think the Shanzhai form will be more accurate because I think that the previous 3 cannot capture what it means exactly. It not only means counterfeit phones, but also means it's phones for the bottom of the pyramid of consumers. And it also represents innovativeness of the Chinese companies who can imitate the foreign firms. So I don't think.
So you would vote for this?
The last one.
You would vote for this. Okay. All right.
It also depends on where the phone is sold.
Let's say you don't have this information. Because look, when we talk about this guanxi, it used to be guanxi inside China, but now guanxi around the world. So we don't care about the geographical coverage of this guanxi. So, but why did you bring?
I guess it depends on whether the theory, the business theory, says it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Our theory has nothing but dead end.
The theory of Sanjiaji.
There's no theory. There's no
Yeah, I
theory.
know, but
This is the
but
frontier.
But you ask different people, they have different opinion whether
That's what I'm asking
the
you.
Sanjai phenomenon is a good phenomenon or whether it is something that need to be corrected. So it really depends on what type of theory one has concerning their viewpoint, their theoretical viewpoint about this type of industry. In my opinion.
So do you have a personal opinion on this?
My personal opinion is more of a benefit.
Sorry.
More of a benefit.
So you prefer the
Yeah,
opinion?
but I'm biased.
Okay, fair enough. All right.
Some of faithful copy.
Faithful copy. They don't. As Jing said, they eventually they copy first, then they quickly abandon faithful copy. They became more innovative imitators. So you can imagine my challenge when I had an EMBA class. One of them is those telephone. His company makes those telephones. So of course he had a very positive story. Then another student said, "I hate them because they eat my lunch." But this is. I mean, I'm asking. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I'm asking a low-level question. How do we? And you have any preference or ideas about how do we express the same in English? That's all.
I think if we're sold in China alone or in Chinese-speaking areas, then the Sanjai phone might be a better translation. But the word has no meaning in other countries.
Sure.
And I think if you look at the past, in terms of products that were being sold outside, for instance, I think the Japanese, when they first started selling the Japanese cars here, they had to anglicize or use names that are more palatable to
Sure.
Western taste. So if these kinds of phones were sold, with a name that nobody can pronounce, nobody knows what it stands for, it's going to be very difficult for it to have a rated market in other countries.
I guess what you're referring to is like Japanese brand Sony. Sony is created for the kind of English-speaking word, but we're not even talking about the brand. It's just this generic label that the Sanjai so cheating. How do we?
People not only a brand, it includes maybe many brands.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, but the way of doing these phones.
Yes, personally, I prefer Shanghai phone. I think it's a context on business idea. Yeah, it's a different business model. It's not the simple copy.
Sure.
It's context on business idea. So.
Okay.
Yeah, not only the copy, it's some new technology. It looks like copy, something copy because they have new technology.
Okay.
And not only cell phone, your T-shirt or your shoe,
现在不为
any
现代
kind
地
of
位
product could be like the Shanghai. It's like the counter feel close to the meaning, but like some brand is Nike and you can see anti-AE in China and you see the iPhone, that's the IPOHEDNE like that in China.
So, how would you pick if this is a multiple choice question?
The first one.
You chose counterfeit phone.
It's
Okay,
not
that's fine.
it's not copy, but it's much similar to that product.
Okay, fair enough.
So I might add on this. It's almost similar to portable underwear. I mean, people use the Sanjai, they use it for a few weeks and then throw it away.
Sure.
So it could be good, it's useful, it's portable, it's cheap. But, so Sanjai phone in that respect is a good one.
So
It's a disposable phone.
Okay, disposable phone. Okay.
Also both counterfeit and negative.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's probably called counterfeit and negative.
That's, I agree with your sentiments, but these words are already appearing. I did some Google search. So branded phone, and so I didn't create these two words, counterfeit phone and branded phone. Not that creative again. Or we could ask some other questions related to some other stuff we talked about. I guess I got your attention on this. This is a hot cutting edge. Make no mistake. But any other questions about?
Yeah, I do have a somewhat serious question.
Sure, please do.
Yeah, and the point about the institution setting the industry-specific formula and strategy. which in turn produce performance. I think it's a very good viewpoint. Give us a very broad framework in terms of what to look for and so on. But in some sense, I'm a little bit, I feel a little bit fortunate that the research direction has not gone into the direction that you would like, and in particular with respect to the antitrust issue. It seems to me, and me personally, I'm an economist by training, by the way. I've done quite a bit of work in the industrial organization area, particularly with respect to antitrust law in the US. And to me, the antitrust law in North America had been somewhat a theoretical quagmire. And to drag that into an international arena discussion will make things even more complicated. And I don't actually see any result, positive result coming out from that other than another form of political or protectionism type of infighting. And in that respect, I also might want to ask you more of a practical question with respect to your observation that Huawei being the #1 patent company in the world. What type of technology is the company currently focusing in doing? I mean, what is the big technology horizons that China sees coming? I mean, we can talk about internet, we can talk about the digital age. What is that internet, what is that mixed technology frontier that will push companies like Huawei to file 1,400 patents a year or something like that? So I wonder if you can comment on those two aspects of my question.
I'll pick your second question first. Around the world, about only 5% of the patents have economic value, have commercialization value. So companies are now into this patent race. So 95% of the patents have no commercialization value. They kind of do it on average. So why do they do it? It's for defensive purposes. Because nowadays, everything's so complicated inside your little telephone or little computer. It's very easy for you as a computer to inadvertently infringe on my patents. So when I was accused by you, if you and our competitors, of inadvertently infringing on your patents, it'll be so much better for me to have a powerful portfolio. Then I'll see if you have inadvertently infringed on some of mine, then I'll have a better negotiation position with you. Otherwise, if I have 0 patents, and you caught me assuming I didn't intentionally do anything wrong, but I inadvertently, accidentally got some of your patents inside my machine, and then you're my competitor, I have to pay my competitor. And I don't like that. So for that reason, companies are now into this patent race, trying to develop, and so lots of these patents are trivial, tiny, of no technological significance to speak of to a lay person like you and me. But most of these patents are for that reasons. And I don't have Huawei's actual breakdown, distribution of the truly strategic patents, like the 5% with commercialization value and the other 95% for defensive reasons. That said, Huawei is known for being the backbone behind a lot of telecom operators in not only throughout the developing Asia, but also in the EU, in Japan as well. Japan Telecom, Italia Telecom, and Orange. These are very picky customers. And if you dial some telephone in these countries, Huawei is the server, is the machine that gets you to dial, when you dial a number, to successfully go through the network. So high reliability, relatively low cost, and some fancy technology. It was only because of the settlement with Cisco, so Huawei was not allowed to enter into the United States. I don't even know if Huawei is in Canada big time or not. So Huawei has some world-leading telephone exchange technology behind its main machines. In fact, when Huawei first came to Cisco, Cisco tried to beat Huawei on technology, failed, on price failed. They did the line test. They invited telecom operators to come to test the equipment with the logos removed between Huawei's machine and Cisco's machine. The only difference was price. And that was a very powerful, compelling rationale for a lot of telecom operators around the world to pick the Huawei machine. So it was in a sense out of desperation. Cisco launched an institution-based missile lawsuit. It was an institution-based missile. It was a political weapon, and it was successful in blocking Huawei for at least a number of years. And it was very interesting. Both sides had a settlement. Both sides declared victory. I actually went to their websites. They had like pages and pages of descriptions of the law battle, legal battle, but they only had one-page description of the press release of dropping the charges. And afterwards, Cisco's CEO went to visit Huawei, and these two guys shook hands, like the former defendants and the former plaintiff. I had my students guess using one word, the content of the conversation. And my students typically said collusion. Collusion. According to rumors, both agreed Cisco was specialized on high-end, Huawei was specialized on low-end. Cisco acknowledged China and Asia would be Huawei's sphere of influence. Cisco's sales in Asia dropped afterwards. And Huawei agreed not to attack the United States at least. Maybe they agreed Africa is fair game, let's compete traditionally in Africa. We don't know. Everything I'm just telling you now is speculation, but they did reach a settlement, and they did reach a one-paragraph, they did announce a one-paragraph press release on both websites. Very mysterious. So, and on your first point, I agree with you. This antitrust literature is a big mess. Antitrust practice is even worse. Microsoft was charged for antitrust violation about a decade ago. I told all my students, what's wrong with Microsoft? Not voluntarily helping its competitors. Okay, and what's wrong with Microsoft? Not voluntarily helping competitors. But if I were your CEO, you were my sales forces, I told you to voluntarily help your competitors, you must be thinking, are you out of your mind? I'm out of my mind. So that was exactly, I'm sorry, why Microsoft got into trouble. I mean, I agree with you, the antitrust literature is a mess. Domestically, it's already a mess, and internationally, it's a bigger can of worms. But I guess we'll have to open up that can now. All right, well, thanks very much.
For a very enlightening, wide-ranging discussion. And, as a non-business scholar, I actually appreciate the fact that I understood much of what you said.
I did my job.
I enjoyed the linguistic foray and on behalf of both you and myself, the David Lamb Center.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, and an Olympic souvenir.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Olympic Games.
That's right. Supporting the packaging industry. Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's on the cover page of the tourist magazine.
It is, yeah. The presence of the community as
Great, thanks very much. Thanks very much, guys.